that? What are these cells? What are these tissues? What do they produce? What hormone? And what does the hormone do? Okay? Thyroid is very distinctive because it's full of these large, relatively spherical structures that we see here, which are called follicles. Not follicle cells, but follicles. They're actually multicellular. The follicle cells are what you see here. Little dots here, those are the nuclei of the follicle cells. And again, if you have your handout handy, okay, turn to the thyroid, okay, that would be on bottom of the first page. It says thyroid gland hormones, okay. And these follicle cells, which make up the walls of the follicles, produce two very important hormones: thyroid and thyroxine. And by the way, you may use the abbreviations here for obvious reasons. However, not something of your manufacture, all right? It's perfectly fine to use these, okay? And all the names of the hormones and their abbreviations are in bold type, as you can see. So triiodothyronine is also known as T sub 3, okay, T3, and thyroxine is T sub 4, okay? Very important hormones. They're produced by the follicle cells, okay, that make up the walls of the follicles. But again, if you get a point on this thing, don't call it a follicle cell. That's the follicle. The follicle cells make up the walls, okay? You can see them here, roughly. I'll keep this thing in focus. These little dots that you see here, these are the nuclei of the follicle cells. And the whole structure then is the follicle. And again, it's these follicle cells that produce T3 and T4. It's stored within the follicle in complex with a protein, and that is known as the, you might want to look at your handout, follow along on that, okay? Thyroglobulin. Let's see if I have mine handy. So, you want to follow along on that, okay? This is page 14, where it says functional endocrine glands. Under thyroid gland, okay? Thyroid follicles, thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin, again, is that protein, okay, complex that holds the T3 and T4. That's where it's stored, and when it's needed, it's released into the blood. Now, what do T3 and T4 do? They basically regulate what we call your basal metabolic rate. In other words, oxygen use, cellular metabolism, breakdown of glucose and fats, catabolism, protein synthesis, growth and development. Have a pronounced effect on what goes on in the body, T3 and T4. Often as people get older, they have problems. Either they don't produce enough T3 and T4, or they produce too much. If they don't produce enough, that's hypothyroidism, and they usually go on drugs. They take them regularly to maintain a proper level of thyroid hormones. If they produce too much, then you've got a problem, because what this does is speed up your basal metabolic rate. You burn calories very quickly. You lose weight. That sounds good, okay? But what's not good is it can speed up your heart, actually put you in tachycardia, which can be very dangerous. Also, you have trouble thermoregulating because you're burning calories so fast, your metabolism is so high, you're hot all the time. And then you got three options. You can take a thyroid hormone antagonist to reduce production of T3 and T4, or you can have the thyroid surgically removed, or they can implant I-131, it's a radioisotope that's taken into the thyroid because the thyroid uses iodine to make the thyroid hormones. The problem with that is you radiate, literally. and you can't be around other people or you zap their thyroid, especially children. What they'll tell you to do is get away from your family. It's better if you just stay in a motel. Don't even be in the same house. If you do, you should sleep separately. Don't hug your children, your wife, spouse, whatever, because you can zap their thyroid as well. You should use separate utensils, wash your clothes separately, and so on. So a period of time, you are a pariah until they zap the thyroid. So, not a very good prospect, but that's what sometimes happens. Okay, so T3 and T4 regulate your basal metabolic rate, okay, how fast you burn the calories, your oxygen use, your breakdown of fats, and glucose, protein synthesis, and so on. All right, there are also some other cells in the thyroid called parafollicular cells. And they're in the tissue here between the thyroid follicles. You see the nucleus of them here. These are parafollicular cells. They produce another hormone called calcitonin. That's at the bottom of your hormone handout, calcitonin. What calcitonin does, it lowers calcium ion levels in the blood. It inhibits osteoclast activity. You may remember when you were studying bone, you have cells that lay down bone matrix, the osteoblasts, as a B as in boy, and the osteoclasts, which chew up the bone matrix. By inhibiting those cells, you can basically take calcium out of the blood, lay down the calcium and calcium salts as part of your inorganic bone matrix. So again, they lower calcium ion levels in the blood, the calcitonin. So it takes calcium out of the blood and encourages the deposition of calcium salts in the inorganic bone matrix. So that's calcitonin. Don't confuse it with calcitriol, which is vitamin D3. Okay, so those two types of cells there. Parafollicular cells in the tissue here between the follicles, and the cells that make up the wall of the follicles are the follicle cells. Follicle cells produce T3 and T4. Parafollicular cells produce calcitonin. Any questions? Okay. Now, we also have little lobes of tissue which are surrounded by the thyroid, and these are the parathyroid glands. On this slide, we happen to have one right here.